Hi folks, and welcome to the Sketchup tutorials. In this video, we're going to cover the rest of the tools here, as well as on the right side. We're going to go pretty quickly through them, since some of them we've seen before or we've used a number of times, or because there's going to be a dedicated video on just that particular tool. So let's get started. The first one, push-pull, we're very familiar with. The next one is the follow me tool. This one allows me to take a surface and follow a certain path. This has its own video, which we'll be exploring later, so we're going to skip over that. And then finally, the offset tool. It allows me to take any surface. So for example, if I take the surface, I can offset either inward or outward. And if I click inward, I can then take this and pull this up, do whatever I want. Likewise, I can press the offset key. I can choose a surface. And then I click and I let go, and I can type in however much I want to go in. So in case you want to be more precise, you have that option too. Okay, moving on. Outer shell. This is something that we're going to be using later on. If you are interested in doing some 3D modeling or 3D printing, this is a very useful tool. For the sake of these videos, we're not going to be using them for the purpose of 3D modeling, but if you look in the description video, I have a course link to my 3D modeling and 3D printing with Sketchup. If you look in the description below, you'll see that I have a link to my Sketchup video and my Sketchup course on 3D model. If you look in the description below, you'll see that I have a Sketchup course on 3D modeling and 3D printing that you can go and follow. And this is going to allow me to do that, but because I'm not working with solids yet, it's going to say that I can't choose to do them. But basically, this allows me to do a number of different functions with solids, which we'll talk about when we get to grouping. The next one is our move tool. So this is our move. So for example, if I want to, let's say, move this entire object, I triple click it, which allows me to select all of its connected surfaces. And if I click on the move tool and then I click on this object, it allows me to move it. So that's pretty cool. I can just keep it, let's say, over here. The next one is the rotate tool. And what this allows me to do is if I choose the center of this object, it'll allow me to rotate it around the center. But if I choose, let's say, the edge surface, it allows me to rotate around that point that I chose. So basically, the rotate tool allows me to designate the axis of rotation and to actually rotate it to wherever I'd like and however many degrees. It works very similar to the arc tool. I click a point and then I click another point, and then I can literally move my mouse and then type in, let's say, 45 degrees, and it will rotate and move it there. And then finally, the scale tool. So the scale tool allows me to scale an object. So this one takes it, and if I choose the corner, it'll manipulate all three of the dimensions all at once. So you can see it's scaling in the bottom right hand corner. That's 50, and that's a 100% or its exact scale, 150, etc., etc. So let's make it 1.5. Enter. And there we go. So if this was originally, let's say, 20, this would now be 30. So it's scaled up 150%. And so that's basically going to cover that tool. The next one is the measurement tool. This is not really that important right now. This is more for if we're looking at architecture or if we're 3D designing something for 3D printing. But basically, this allows me to take the measurements. So if I come here and I come over here, you'll notice that it allows me to take the measurements between the various points, which is useful, again, when we need some precision or an accuracy when we're 3D modeling something for fitment. But for the sake of our video, and since we're just kind of playing around, we don't have to worry about it too much. The next one is kind of our viewing tool. So this is something we'll talk later this is something that we'll talk about later once we are working with our buildings and we go into architecture. It allows me to kind of walk through. So for example, like if I want to choose a walk tool, let's say I scroll down here and I want to walk through these various buildings I've built. If I click my mouse and I start moving my mouse up, it'll basically allow me to do like a walking tour of my 3D models. And so you can see that there. And then the next one is I can position my cameras of how I'm going to view it. We're not going to go into this too much because this is more related to architecture. So for right now, I'm just going to zoom out. And then finally, we have all of the tools that we've used already, our orbit panning, etc. Now to the right side. So the first one is our entity info. This is important. We're going to be talking about this when we are creating groups and why this is important. You'll see that materials is also open because we had it open before, but I'm going to just close it. Let's X out of that. So entity info is important because it allows us to understand what things are. So for example, if I click on a surface, it'll tell me that it's a particular surface. And then when I choose an object like this dude, it'll tell me that he's a component, etc. This will be important later on, so just know that. The next thing is the outliner. We don't really need this one, so I'm just going to close that off. The next one is the instructor. So the instructor is a brief way to kind of learn some of the things we've already learned. It's just like a way to understand what you're doing. You don't really need this one, so we're going to skip that. The next one, we're going to skip that. The next one is the 3D warehouse. This is kind of neat because this allows us to kind of see some of the other objects people have created and to import them into your own 3D model. My only caveat for this is that if you bring in some of these objects, they can make your SketchUp run really slow because the more polygons your computer has to render, the more powerful your computer has to be. So in case you import something and you notice it gets really slow, it's probably because someone designed it on a really powerful computer. And then when you bring it in, it's just hard for your computer to render. But for example, let's say I wanted to bring in this window and I say, oh, this looks really nice. Let's say this triangular facade, and I wanted to download it. I just click download and it will download it and I can bring it in somewhere here. And then I'm not going to configure it because I don't need to modify it, but it just allows me to look at it and say, oh, that's pretty neat. This little window configuration. I can add it to, like, let's say once we start working on our house project, but for the sake of this video, that's what 3D Warehouse does. The next one, components. So components is going to be important later on once we start working with groups. We're not going to go into it that much, so we're going to X out of that. Let's X out of the entity info. Materials, we've covered this before. Basically, it allows us to create different textures in our 3D models. We'll cover that in our house video. The next one, styles. This is just the way our objects look. So for example, if you want to choose different color set, you can change it so that your layout looks different. For the sake of our video, we're not going to go into it too much, but if you'd like to change out what you're looking at, you can obviously come in here and play around. So feel free to pause the video, play around, but I just want to show you what each of these menus are. And to keep this video short, I'm not going to go too in depth on this. Tags are basically what they sound like. It allows you to add tags to certain objects. So if you're doing a demonstration or presentation, they can be useful for someone first looking at your 3D models. The next one is scenes. So this gives you your different views. So for example, if you're doing a presentation, it'll give you different perspectives on your 3D model, and it gives you the orthogonal views, your top, side, left, 3D perspectives. So you can kind of filter through those. The next one is our display. And so this is where I was talking about once we start building up our houses and our little communities, we can turn on shadows and make it a little bit more realistic. For the sake of this video, we're not going to go into this too much, so let's move on to the next one. Next one is our model info. This just gives us some of the dimensions and things like that. And then finally, we have Solid Inspector. This is something only relevant for our 3D modeling, for 3D printing purposes, and I believe it's also a paid add-on. And so this is something that we're not going to be covering for the sake of this course, since we're not going to be focusing on 3D printing. All right. So I hope this video is helpful. I know it was a bit much, but generally we're not going to be using much on the right side menus, and for the left side bottom half, you know, I think the only ones we really be using are these, and we'll talk about Follow Me in a future video. But yeah, I hope this video was helpful. I'll see you guys in the next one.